So during the time that the temple stood in Jerusalem, there was no Jewish holiday that was considered to be more joyous than the holiday of Sukkot. Today we build Sukkot in our backyard, but you have to keep in mind that most people in those days didn't live in Jerusalem. They were farmers who would pack up everything they owned, they would put it on their back, and bring their hotel with them, like a camping trip, to Jerusalem on their backs, and have a free hotel for a week. Yet the highlight of Sukkot for Jews who were living in the rabbinic period, as well as for Jews living in temple times, would be unrecognizable for Jews living today observing Sukkot, because we don't celebrate it and we don't have it. And that's because for most Jews, the highlight of Sukkot in biblical times was a moment in the holiday called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, which loosely translates to the water drawing festival. Anyone heard of this before? I mean, aside from those of you in my Talmud class this week? The water drawing festival had greater spiritual significance, though, no doubt, but for most Israelites living in the times when the temple stood, it was really an excuse to throw one heck of a party. Sukkot, which I started when I first got here, was inspired by this notion of Simchat Beit HaShoeva. The Talmud says that the Hasidim, the early pious Jews, would dance wildly in the streets. One great sage, Shimon ben Gamliel, used to juggle not 3 but 4, but 8 fiery torches at the same time. Other rabbis would plank using this ritual called a kiddah. They take their thumbs, they would plant them into the ground, and using their muscles plank as a way of showing their physical prowess. And it is in this context of this great celebration that the famous sage Hillel made what in my mind is the most least famous of his expressions. We all know the many things that the sage Hillel says. Imei nanili mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Don't separate from the community. But almost nobody has heard of the phrase that Hillel says at the water drawing festival, and this is it. Imanikan hakolkan, im enikan mikan. Which means if I am here, then everything is here. But if I am not here, then it's like no one is here at all. What on earth does that mean? At first, you might think it's obvious. It means Hillel has a huge ego. With all the drinking that was no doubt taking place at the festival, I don't want to discount that as being a real possibility. Has anyone in this room ever watched professional wrestling? I'm embarrassed to say I have, because I had a roommate in rabbinical school that was really, really into professional wrestling. Those of you who have ever watched WWF or WWE or whatever the different versions of it have, know that before the greatest wrestlers walk into the ring, they have what is called the taunt. They size up the competition and they talk about their own prowess in that moment. It's like Hillel is LeBron James walking into a bar and saying, "Where's the party at?" Everyone knows that it's only a party because LeBron James is at the party. And so Hillel might be saying, "Ain't no party like a Hillel party. If I'm not there, this is no party, it doesn't matter." Now, the other rabbis, of course, raise slightly more righteous possibilities about what might be happening here. Hillel may not be talking about himself, but he may be talking about the Jewish people and our relationship with God. Less cynically, perhaps, than I first made note of, it could be that Hillel is speaking about how great it is that the Jewish people are all gathered together for Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Because if the Jewish people are Eini Kan, if the Jewish people are not there, then there's no party. There's no point. If the Jewish people aren't celebrating Sukkot, there is no Sukkot. Our rabbis suggest a second alternative. It could be that Hillel is speaking as God in the first person. Hillel looks out at the crowd and says, there's a lot of joy and partying going on. Let me remind you about God. Imanikan hakolkan. Don't forget, if I, God, am here at this party, the rest of this is irrelevant. I, God, am the center of everything. Imanikan mikan. But if I, God, am not here in this particular moment, what's all this for? Why am I doing this at all? Well, today I'd like to raise a third possibility about Hillel's expression. It's my own my own interpretation of this teaching that I think will shed some light into our understanding of Sukkot as well as the rest of our lives. I don't think Hillel is bragging here. I also don't think he's talking about the Jewish people, and I don't think he's talking about God. I think he's talking about us as individuals and our propensity to be present or not present in any given situation. Imanikan hakolkan. If I am here present in this moment, whatever that moment is in my life, it's all good. If I'm sitting at my kid's bar mitzvah and I'm taking it all in the moment, hakolkan. Everything is good. If my kid's playing soccer on the soccer field and I'm looking at my child run back and forth, imanikan hakolkan. If I am here, it's all good. But if I am not paying attention to the particular moment I am in the moment, if I am physically present but not spiritually alert, if I'm worried about the caterer and the invitations and the guest lists, if I'm worried about whatever's on my cell phone that I'm checking and not looking at the field, guilty as charged. Then who is here? Mikan. Who is it that's really present in that particular moment? The answer to this charge we all know. If you're not paying attention, it doesn't matter if you're in the room or not. Why share this message on Sukkot? It is because Sukkot is a holiday that, as we read this morning, is largely contingent on whether or not we show up. And not just whether we show up physically, but whether we are spiritually here in the moment. Think about it. We're all a little bit tired after the holidays, aren't we? No one wants to be in shul on Sukkot. And yet we come. Because it's a lot of fun. You hear the children's voices outside. They're having a great time right now. Maybe it's not quite as fun as the people had in biblical times at the water drawing festival with the planking and the torch juggling. But we get to shake a lulav and etrog. We parade around the sanctuary. There's a lot to enjoy about this holiday, Jewish holiday. And yet when we do show up, we also need to ask ourselves, Imani kan. Are we in fact here? Are we in synagogue out of some sense of obligation? Or are we here out of a profound sense of joy that makes us want to be here so we can celebrate the moment together? Are we here because we want to be here? Are we here because we're taking in the joy of community in the middle of a pandemic, being together at this time? It is in this way that Sukkot, as I alluded to earlier, sends a very powerful message about showing up in our lives in general. There are so many moments, I just alluded to two earlier, but I'm sure you can think of so many more, where we show up to things physically, but we may not be spiritually present in the moments. How many of us have gone to soccer practice and been on the cell phone instead of looking at our kids? Try going to one. Everybody is on their cell phones and not looking at their kids. How many of us lie in bed at night looking at the television or looking at something else, being distracted, instead of being present for our spouses or our families? Guys, you don't have to look that hard to come up with examples in our lives where we are there, where we are kan, aval eini kan, but are not really there in the moment. Which is why this Sukkot, I would like to declare that this statement by Hillel should now be his most famous. The counselors at Camp Ramah should sing songs about it on the guitar. We should have an entire revolution, no greater than less than Simchat HaBeit HaShoeva, to bring it back to the forefront of the times in which we live. This Sukkot, let's challenge ourselves to be more present. Whether we are partying in the temple courtyard in Jerusalem or not, or whether we are on the soccer field with our children, if we are there not just physically but spiritually, then everything is there. Chag Sameach.